guys, this is Module 2 of the Blooming with Intention, Social and Emotional Learning and Life Skills Curriculum. Today we're going to talk about becoming. What do you think of when I say that, becoming? Of course, the first thing that comes to mind for me is the Michelle Obama book. I was inspired by the title of it to name this chapter Becoming because of what we'll be discussing. We're going to discuss optimism and pathways to optimism. We'll talk about why optimism is important and how it can serve you well. We're also going to talk about mindset and the way our thoughts form our mindsets and how that affects us in our lives. We'll talk about explanatory styles, the way we explain the things that happen to us. We'll also get into talking about the ABCs of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. I'll tell you a bit about that really fascinating stuff as we'll be talking about our thoughts and how we think about, again, situations that happen to us and how we think it might be automatic that this happens, so that's the result, but there's a step in between that a lot of us miss. So we'll get into that. And then we'll talk a bit about self-coaching because this is important on our path to becoming, learning how to coach ourselves through our challenges and how to overcome them with our reframing our thoughts to thoughts that serve us better. And lastly, we'll talk about value-based actions, taking actions that help move us in the direction of our dreams, our vision, our goals. So this is one of my favorite modules because it's very foundational, right? Asking ourselves the question, who are you becoming, is something that we can do on a regular basis. Asking our children, asking our students, who are you becoming, helps direct their intentions, their attention to their intentions. And when we focus our attention on our intentions, we can be a lot more deliberate in the actions that we take and the paths that we take towards our future. All right, so good stuff. Let's jump in. And our first lesson is going to be on optimism. Optimism. Choose to be optimistic because it feels better and you'll do better. Let's jump right in. So optimism is explained as a generalized sense of confidence about the future, characterized by a broad expectancy that outcomes are likely to be positive. This is the explanation of Ilona Bonawell, who's the author of Positive Psychology, Theory, Research, and Applications. It's a book that I've read that's informed me on a lot of the things that are in this workbook. So let's talk about this. A generalized sense of confidence about the future. Optimism can be broken down into two types: hopefulness and explanatory or attributional style. So first, let's talk about hopefulness, because we know that hope is a key ingredient to even believing that our future is worth the effort that we have to put into making it happen, right? When we are hopeful, you can say to a person, like, what do you hope will happen in the future? And a more optimistic person is going to have a more positive outlook. They're going to say, I hope that I will accomplish all that I set out to in life, right? So that hopefulness is a part of the agency that we build, a part of thinking that we can and knowing that we can go after our dreams. Now, another part of optimism, again, is our explanatory style. I'm going to do a whole lesson on explanatory style, but for now, let's just tap into it. Let's just explore it on the surface. So explanatory style or attributional style or causal analysis, as we call it in psychology, is one of the key aspects to optimism. How do you explain what happens to you? So in the basics of explanatory style, we have what we refer to as the 3 Ps. Personalization. It happened to me because of me or not because of me. Pervasiveness, that this always happens or never happens. And permanence. Permanence being that this affects everything or affects very little that has to do with me. And so when we get into talking more about explanatory styles, we'll see that it affects the simple things that happen and the major things that happen to us. But our optimism can be greatly affected by how we explain what happens to us, how we take accountability for that, how pervasive we believe it is. Is it this always happens to me? If you ever hear a kid get really upset about something, what do? They usually go, this always happened. You never let me do X, Y, and Z, right? And so that's that permanence, that it's always happening, the pervasiveness, that it's in everything, not just in what they can't do at the time. And it's that personalization of me, you're doing this to me. The little kid in us tends to come out when we're faced with challenges, but we're going to talk about some ways to avoid those knee-jerk reactions and actually get into redirecting our thoughts and expanding our view on what's happened and how we can explain that. This has a very big effect on our optimism, and so that's why it's a very important part of our discussion. So optimism can be defined as the lens through which we see the world. Is your lens clean or is it a little dirty? Well, we're going to have some assessments for you to take so you can actually analyze, do a self-assessment on yourself. How optimistic am I? But we'll talk a little more and I'll give you a couple of clues. So the basis of optimism doesn't lie in positive phrases or images of victory, but in the way that you think about causes. And now that's a quote from Martin Seligman, one of the fathers of positive psychology. The way we think about the causes, right? Going back to that causal analysis. Optimism, two people, optimism and pessimism is not a trait, but it's a way of thinking. It's a thinking style, right? So you're not either an optimistic or pessimistic person, as we often say, but you either have optimistic or pessimistic thinking. And explaining it like this allows room for us to grow out of our tendencies. So not just labeling ourselves as pessimistic and saying, that's just how I think, but recognizing that we may be optimistic in certain areas and we may be pessimistic in other areas, that we do have a choice, and it's the awareness that really helps us to recognize and make a decision on which we're going to go with, the optimism or the pessimism. In order to feel good, we have to think good thoughts, right? So optimism often serves us well. Research tells us that it's not who a person is that affects them, but how they are thinking. Think about that. So no matter what your circumstances are, no matter what background you come from, how you are thinking plays a huge part in where you are going. We know that you cannot always control what happens in your life, but you can always control how you think about it. We can create our own reality. So let's talk about some of the benefits of optimism. Optimistic people are more likely to persevere in the face of setbacks. When we're optimistic and we have hope about the future, we feel more comfortable putting in the effort that it takes to get past the challenge that we experience. Optimistic people adapt better to negative events. So if something is happening, more optimistic people are less likely to freak out and give up and have a mental breakdown. Optimistic people are more likely to persevere. They're more likely to adapt in the negativity at the time, to accept what it is, and then to work their way forward. We know that optimistic people are often more solutions focused. Optimistic people have more freedom from anxiety and depression. In positive psychology, we define anxiety as worry about the future and depression as worry about the past, or thoughts, overcoming of the self of thoughts about the past that are negative thoughts, right? And so when we're more optimistic, we have less anxiety and we have less depression. We also have higher self-esteem. More optimistic people have higher self-esteem, belief in self, higher self-confidence. They're more able to focus on what's right with them as opposed to what's focusing on what's wrong with them. And this is a huge part of why I love positive psychology and why I was attracted to positive psychology, because it helps us to recognize what's right with us and build on it, to build on our strengths. We're not going to be perfect. You don't always have to get to a 10 in one area of life. You can add up different areas of what makes you special. You can add up your signature character strengths and lean on that, be authentic in who you are in order to really be confident about who you are. That's very important for us personally, and also if we are parents or if we are teachers, that we see that in our students, that we're not comparing them to each other, but we're recognizing what's beautiful in each person and how to build on that. So optimistic people also have better social relationships. It's kind of fun being friends with an optimist, right? Pessimistic people, how's your day going? Oh, it was terrible. Everything's always wrong. Let me tell you about another problem that I had. That can wear you out after a while, right? But an optimistic person is often going to add some spunk to a conversation and focus on things that make the other person feel better, that help to form more of a healthy relationship with another person than forming a relationship on negative things. Optimistic people report more health promoting behaviors and enjoy better physical health than pessimists. Isn't this interesting? Optimistic people have lower rates of heart disease, lower rates of stress ultimately leads to a lower rate of dis-ease, which causes disease, right? And so better health is reported by more optimistic people. And optimistic people exert more effort and tend not to give up, right? We talked about that because effort is not looked at as a negative thing, but just as a means to getting what we have hope for will be the positive outcome in the future. So if you want to look at optimism, even when it comes to performance on the job, there are studies that show that optimistic sales agents, extremely optimistic sales agents, outperform extremely pessimistic sales agents by 319%, right? So optimism can serve your pockets too. All right. So let's talk a little bit about pessimism and its setbacks. I am not going to tell you that pessimism is bad. We're not here to say that optimism is good and pessimism is bad. I'm actually going to bring your attention to an area of work where pessimism could be good. In general, pessimism doesn't often serve us well all the time, but sometimes it helps to be pessimistic. We are actually evolutionary. We've evolved to be pessimistic because it helped us to stay alive during our evolution. If there were danger, for example, happening, we had to be alert and aware of the bad things that could happen in order to live. So if we just had our head in the clouds and we were just rosy eyes and rosy shades and head in the clouds, and we're not paying attention to the threats that could be happening. In the past, we could have gotten eaten by a saber-toothed tiger or crushed by a boulder, or something could have happened to us because we weren't alert. We weren't paying attention to the negative things that can happen. So we actually have evolved. We've evolved with pessimism serving us well. But in modern day and ages, in these modern times, our pessimism does not serve us so well anymore. In order to be optimistic, we actually have to be intentional about our optimism. We have what's called a negativity bias, and our negativity bias, the negative that happens gets more attention than the positive things that happen. So let's think about that for a moment. If you have a fantastic day and one thing goes wrong, what do you go home and tell your spouse or your friends about? You often start with that one thing that went wrong, right? It can erase all the great things that happen because we focus on the negative. Negative, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, that expression is another example of how negativity often gets more attention than positivity. So in order to be positive, in order to be optimistic, we actually have to be very intentional. So again, getting back to the setbacks of pessimism and how it doesn't serve us well most of the time. Pessimism promotes depression for all of the things that we just discussed a few minutes ago, right? So in depression, focusing on the negative things that have happened in the past and getting stuck in the past can take us into a state of depression. Pessimism also produces inertia rather than activity in the face of setbacks. We oftentimes, when we're being more pessimistic, tend to give up because we don't have hope that what we do will make any difference. And so if we are being pessimistic, then we are saying, what's the effort in even trying, right? And so that's what happens in the face of setback and the challenges when we're pessimistic about the situation at hand. Pessimism also results in us feeling bad subjectively, feeling down, feeling blue, worried, and anxious, right? When we're more pessimistic, it doesn't feel so good. Pessimism is often a self-fulfilling prophecy because pessimists don't persist in the face of challenges. So let me explain that a bit more. a self-fulfilling prophecy, and we're going to get more into this in another lesson. If you think there's no hope in me putting effort into getting what I want out of life, things never go my way, bad things always happen to me, then if you have this way of thinking, then you believe that it's not worth the effort of of doing anything to go towards a better outcome. And what do? You become demotivated to actually do anything. And so what happens? What you believed was going to happen. You believed that negativity was going to happen. You believed that there was no use in putting effort in. You believed that there's nothing you could do that's going to affect your circumstances. And so you act as such, and your circumstances don't change. So this is what I mean by a self-fulfilling prophecy. We'll talk more about it later. Lastly, even when pessimists are right, and things turn out badly, they still feel worse because their explanatory style turns the setback into a disaster. Again, back to that thinking of, oh, something went right, but things don't go right for me, so I'm just waiting for the other shoe to drop, right? And so there's still that tendency to continue to look at things in a negative way, even when they're positive. So that's what I mean about, is your lens clean? Are you looking through a dirty lens, or are you looking through optimistic, clear, or even rose-colored shades? They shouldn't always be rosy, but sometimes it helps. Okay, so when does it help to be pessimistic? Did you guess? Can you guess? What profession could it help to see the negative or to be looking for problems? How about lawyers? Pessimistic people who are lawyers actually often tend to do better at their jobs. When I found this out, I decided I couldn't go into law. But pessimism can often serve you well, because as a lawyer, you have to think of the worst case scenario. And in thinking of worst case scenarios, that's often how we are able to pick apart a story and help the defendant win, So pessimism can serve you well when you're a lawyer. In many other cases, it does not serve you well. According to the Center for Disease Control, 1 out of 10 people report depression. 1 out of 20 people report major depression. And depression affects over 121 million people worldwide, women experiencing more depression than men. A lot of this depression, I believe, could be countered if we are more intentional about teaching people how to reframe their thinking and how to control their mind chatter. We're going to talk about mind chatter and our thoughts, the different types of thoughts, as we move on in these lessons. So next, we'll be talking about how to cultivate optimism in lesson 2.